was Knox brother McCulloch?
Because Knox kind of said that most of what was going on should be money, so like they said it was like necessary.
Okay, good. So we start up. Can't reach it high. McCulloch v. Maryland, right? Our first case today of the term. And this case recognizes a very broad scope of implied powers, but there were limits, right? It said there's still some things the federal government can't do, and there are these boundaries. And the government also said, the court also said, we look at motivation, right? Is the government trying to do something that's national or trying to do something local? What we're starting to see with Knox is they don't even care. They simply say if Congress deems this law to be necessary, that's good enough for us. I mean, that's really the upshot of Knox. If a majority of Congress and the president agreed on a bill, good enough for us. We don't have to second guess that. So it's a very broad scope of implied powers. Everyone okay with Knox? This was our class 2 classes ago. All right, let's go do question number 2, please. I'm going to do more of these questions at the semester. I've been slacking. I forgot to do a couple of these yesterday, so I apologize. Let's do question number 2. So again, short answer, write about it. In the end, I want about a sentence. You can't do much more than the box. Question number 2 is, why was the Sherman Antitrust Act unconstitutional as applied to the EC Knight Corporation? Why was the Sherman Antitrust Act unconstitutional as applied to the EC Knight Corporation? And just who's next? Marilyn, you next? Okay, Marilyn and Abdullah, you're on deck. Okay, take about a minute and a half to think of an answer. I'm sorry?
No, I'm thinking out loud.
That's okay. We don't think out loud. It's actually very funny. I teach a Supreme Court class, and I always have these advocates in my class. And I say, how do you prepare for a Supreme Court argument? You know what they do? Right, Addie? They walk up and down the halls talking to themselves. And one guy, he has, I think, 80 scores argument, says, I put the ear pods in, but I'm not talking to anyone. So they think I'm talking to someone, but I'm not. So that's tricky. You don't look crazy. You look Bluetooth, right? Anyway, go on and distract me and answer your questions. Yes, talking to yourself is fine. I have no objection. It's a mark of genius, I think. Just don't answer yourself. All right. All right, Meryl, I'll come to you in about 20 seconds, okay? All right. Okay. So, Marilyn, let me just recap. What was the Sherman Antitrust Act? Just to refresh your memory, please.
It's against monopoly.
Good. It's a federal law or state law? Correct. What did EC Knight do that sort of bothered the government in this case?
So that's the sugar factory.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay.
So this one, they were turned into a conglomerate.
Yes, monopoly. Exactly right. Exactly. Okay, she's right. So there had been an effort by this company, EC Knight, to basically pool together, to combine, conglomerate, if you will, all these different sugar refining companies. And all these sugar companies would be together. And then what would happen, Abdullah? What was the government's concern if all these sugar companies sort of came together into one entity?
It would be like it would be too powerful, I guess, or too.
And what's the consequence? What are the effects of all that power being consolidated?
There's only one way you can go based off of there's not a lot of direction.
And how would that affect consumers, perhaps?
They would control everything about price.
And what would that do to interstate commerce?
It would make it difficult.
Burden. Maybe say it was burden. Right. So the argument of the government is having all of the sugar in one company would create burden or obstructions for the flow of commerce from one state to another. Right. That's the government's argument. Oscar, I think you're next, or is it Caroline? Oh, Caroline, I'll go you first, Oscar. Can I ask this question, please? What exactly is it that the Sherman Act tried to regulate? What specific act? What were they trying to prohibit?
They're trying to avoid monopolies happening so that they can have manipulation of the market.
Correct. Did this law prevent the shipment of the sugar in interstate commerce?
No, that's why they were overreaching by trying to reduce this act.
What was the law actually prohibiting?
Just the manipulation of market prices.
By what means? What actual act was the law prohibiting or regulating?
The restraint of trade and commerce.
Be more.
Several states.
But before you ship it, what do you have to do?
You have to manufacture it.
So what was the law actually regulating?
The manufacturer.
Correct. This law was regulating not the shipment of the goods, it was regulating the manufacture of the sugar. We're refining the sugar. You take the sugar cane, you boil it, and you make sugar, right? So Oscar, let me come to you, sir. Which comes first? It sounds obvious. Manufacturing or the commerce? But what was the statute regulating? Did this manufacture itself directly affect interstate trade?
Yes.
Is that what the court found?
No.
Try it again.
No, not directly.
What was the effect? Was it direct or indirect? Weren't you the direct indirect question yesterday? Yeah, I thought that was right. Okay, funny, it wound up being right. So the answer here for number 2, the law was unconstitutional because it was a regulation not of the commerce, the shipment, but the manufacturer. And manufacture comes before commerce. And to Oscar's question from I think last class and also for today, the court found this was an indirect regulation. What do I mean? This didn't directly regulate interstate commerce. It sort of got interstate commerce indirectly. It said, well, if we ban the manufacture of the sugar won't be sent across state lines. And if the sugar is not sent across state lines, it won't create these burdens on commerce. See, there's like a couple change the inference, like A to B, B to C, right? It's an indirect relationship. What the court said is you can only regulate direct relationships on interstate commerce, right? If it directly affects interstate commerce, you can regulate it. Yes, sir. Correct. Right. The regulation of manufacture had an indirect effect on interstate commerce. That's it. Say it again. It's a good answer, actually. Yes, sir. Good answer. Right. But instead of saying indirectly regulating, I'll tweak it a little bit. I would say it had an indirect effect. I'm saying the same thing you are, just a little bit different words. It had an indirect effect in interstate commerce. Not a direct effect, an indirect effect. And the court said that's too attenuated. There's too much of a gap between what they're doing in the sugar refinery and interstate commerce. So let's go back to our sort of chart of all of our different cases. And if you look at EC Knight, so you got Knight, it knocks all the way over here, right? And EC Knight jumps down over here. The court's pulling back, say, look, we're lining up with McCulloch. McCulloch's over here. It's like, we're going to do McCulloch. We're not going further. They didn't overrule Knox, but these decisions are in tension, as one might say. Okay, everybody with me so far? All right, buckle up, as they say. This class is really great after one class and 2 classes. Like, wow, we have all these cases, and I'm trying to put them all together for you. It's not easy. If you're having difficulty, I'm with you. All right. Oh, this one's too easy. The blank clause authorized Congress to prohibit shipment of lottery tickets. Brilliant, lovely. You'll know it, right? It's always necessary and proper. So I don't have to waste the poll question that one. Okay. All right, let's go down now to our next case. This will be for Fidel in about a minute and a half. The question number 4, let's do this one. How did the court distinguish Hammer v. Dagenhart from EC Knight? How did the court distinguish Hammer v. Dagenhart from EC Knight? That's our next question for today. Okay. All right, Fidel, I'll give you another 30 seconds. You're almost there. And I'll let this keep running if you're still typing. I don't want you to stop short. Okay. All right, Fidel, let's come to you, sir. All right. So just refresh your recollection. What was Hammer versus Dagenhart?
They were trying to regulate the way how the goods were made with child labor. They're trying to like basically ban that.
Okay, so in EC Knight, they're regulating manufacture, right? What was the thing they were regulating in Hammer? What actual act? Well, just be careful. What were they actually? Were they regulating child labor itself?
No, but that was kind of like their background reason.
Oh, hold on. You got to tell me back. You got to tell me what background reason. What do you mean by that? You're on the right track.
They were prohibiting the transportation.
But isn't this what they're allowed to do? Aren't they allowed to ban the shipment of the goods in interstate commerce? Can't you do that? So then why was EC Knight saying you can't do that? Why was it unconstitutional in EC Knight? What did the court say?
You can't ban it.
Try it again. In EC Knight, they said you can't ban manufacture, but you can ban shipment of goods. So then Congress comes and says, okay, we'll ban shipment of goods made with child labor. Why isn't that consistent with EC Knight? Why can't you do that, Fidel?
Because essentially, Dagenhart, they were saying it's up to the states to impose regulations of how they're manufactured.
But this isn't regulating manufacturers; it's regulating shipment. So why can't they regulate shipment in Hammer? Yeah, it's the same. They said in the first case, EC Knight, you can regulate shipment. That's interstate commerce. Why can't you regulate shipment here in Hammer? Elizabeth, want to take a stab? But they're not regulating child labor; they're regulating the shipment. How do you sort of square that? You're right what you're saying, but how do you square that with the facts? Elizabeth, let me ask a question differently. Was this actually concerned about regulating the shipment of goods? What was the real reason for the statute, my friend? Good. Okay, she said it correctly. The law in Hammer was on its face, right? On the face about regulating shipment of goods between states. That was the reason Congress gave. But the court says, no. We know the real reason for this. The real reason for this is to try to regulate labor conditions. Because if you ban the shipment of goods made with child labor, no one's going to make it, right? You're not going to make a good that you can't ship out of state. You lose all your profits. So this was kind of like a backdoor way. I think Fidel said the real reason. Is that what the word you used a minute ago? Background. Thank you, sir. Yeah, the background reason. Fidel said background reason, right? The real reason, the background reason, is they're trying to regulate wages. They're trying to ban labor conditions. This is what you might call a pretext, but the government gives one reason for doing something, but there's really something else. And that's actually consistent with McCulloch. Marshall says in McCulloch, if Congress gives you a pretextual reason, that's not the real reason, the court can set it aside. All right, so again, how did the court distinguish Hammer versus Dagenhart from EC Knight? The answer is that in Hammer, it's true that they were banning the shipment of goods across state lines, but the real reason was to regulate local labor conditions. And as Elizabeth said a minute ago, local labor conditions is a matter for state law. It's under the state and the 10th Amendment. It's not for the Congress to regulate. That was Hammer. Yes, sir. Brian, go ahead.
Did Hammer change the way that courts look at how Congress justifies the means and the ends, or is it pretty consistent?
Say your question one more time, please.
The way that the court looks at how Congress the meaning the ends justify the meaning.
Yeah.
Does it change?
Yeah, it does. You bet it does. So let me go back to my chart. All right, you'll be looking at this chart a lot next week or so. In Knox v. Lee, the court basically said, we don't really care about the relation between the means and the ends. If Congress deems it reasonable, that's good enough for us. If you look at EC Knight, and especially Hammer is the big one. Hammer says, yeah, we're going to scrutinize the means and the ends. If you say your reason is to ban the shipment across state lines, that doesn't really accomplish your goal. Your goal is to ban child labor. So there's a disconnect with your means and the ends. So I think your question, Brian, is very perceptive. In different times, the court applies different levels of, you might call it scrutiny, right? How closely are you analyzing what the government's doing? And if you look at Knox, if you look at some of the other New Deal cases, they're basically saying, we're not going to look at this carefully. If Congress says it's okay, A+, right? Good enough for us. Whereas in E.C. Knight Hammer, they're saying, well, we're gonna exercise our independent judicial authority and look at this more carefully. All right. Come with me. All right, the next question you're going to hate, but I'm sorry, it's useful. I'm being honest with you. I've done this. I've done this before. So I'm going to ask you a series of questions, or actually a single question, in different years. And why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? So stupid. Why? It's hard enough to the law today. Why have to think about the laws in 1869, right? I got you. I think in order to understand the law today, you have to see the development. How to get to the present moment. So I'm going to ask you the same question at 5 points in time. Okay? So the question is this. Congress enacts a law to regulate the wages of workers at coal mines that ship coal across state lines. Again, so they're regulating the wages for coal that's destined to cross state lines. Congress finds that the moral conditions in mines are low and the safety conditions are poor. So there's 2 rationales. 1, morality, and 2, safety. And my question is this statute constitutional? Yes or no? A is yes, B is no. So the first year I want to ask you about is 1869. And, I'm not trying to trick you. We have a case from 1869. It's called DeWitt, right? And I'm not trying to trick you. I'm being very transparent with the years. Make sure you outline whatever it is as years now. This will be important for you. I'm trying to tell you exactly what's expected of you. So the first question, number 1, this will be for Shelton in 30 seconds. Is this statute constitutional in 1869? Okie doke. Shelton, what's your answer here, sir?
In 1869, my answer would be no.
Okay, so that's good. Okay, 84% of you, that's correct. The answer here is B. Shelton, tell me why you think the answer is B. The answer is no.
At that time, the Chase Court was not as broad in their interpretation.
Okay.
So they said this is a pretext to control working conditions, and that it is a
Yep.
state law issue. That
Okay, so what is the relationship between the wages in a mine and the coal going across state lines? What's that relationship like, Shelton?
I think the only relationship would be the profit of the company. But I don't think
Is that a direct or maybe indirect relationship?
I think that would be indirect.
Correct. So to be sure, the wages paid to mine workers might have an effect on interstate commerce, right? Imagine you don't pay them enough, they have to work too hard, it's dark and dreary, they injure themselves, maybe they don't dig up as much coal, maybe the coal they do is not clean. Stuff can happen in a mine when they're not treated well. That could affect coal going to other states. But that requires a lot of inferences, a lot of jumps. And you might say the relationship between the local regulations and interstate commerce is too remote. It's not direct. The court didn't have this direct indirect language yet, but it's the same idea, right? This is not a direct relation. Yes, Stephen.
So, that was kind of what I was going to ask about was, should we be using the direct indirect with means and ends even whenever for cases that we're not there yet fully?
It's a good question. The short answer is probably not. If I say you're in 1869, don't use the direct indirect language, but Chase used the word remote in his opinion. If you go back to DeWitt, he uses the word remote. And I'll tell you remote and indirect, it's the same thing. So, what was kind of funny, I think Stephen's question illustrates this, is the court's been doing the same thing for 100, 200 years. They just use different language to get there. Means, ends, direct, indirect, substantial effect, aggregate. It's basically all saying the same thing. What's the relationship between this local activity and interstate commerce? How close is this local activity to interstate commerce? And that's the question of whether Congress can regulate it or not. Does that help you, Stephen?
Yes.
Okay, good question.
I don't like how they, like every single state uses Maryland college to rationalize their holding.
Isn't that something they all cite it, but they all do it differently? Isn't that something? Yeah, I mean, Chief Justice Marshall, I say he's overrated, but he's not. He's just venerated as kind of just like this icon, like, you know, like God. Like, you know, if they're you know, like they cancel law schools. There are law schools named after John Marshall. They changed their name another time. But for the longest time, he was just venerated as this God of the law. And our Chief Justice now, John Roberts, like just like worships him. He has like a little shrine in his closet, like John Marshall statues. He's like, please be as good as you are, right? He won't be. You never will be. Roberts doesn't like me. It's fun. It's a true story. So I've been criticizing the guy for a long time. I never actually met him, and I was at a reception last year, and I woke up to, you know, Mr. Chief Justice, my name is Josh Blackman. It's good to meet you. He's like, I know who you are.
Say the story when you trip. Oh, or was that not with him?
That was Scalia. Yeah, this is also a true story. So this was, I think it must have been 2010 or 11. I was maybe a year or two out of law school, and I was at a big convention, a big federal site convention, and I was there, as always, with my laptop typing. I plugged my cord in to charge my computer, and I was sitting kind of at the aisle. And then Justice Scalia walked into the ballroom, and he's walking along, and he trips on my cable. And for a moment, my heart went, oh my God, I'm gonna be kicked out the bar. They're gonna excommunicate me. I made Justice Scalia fall, and he kind of like, he just comes here, he grumbled, and he kept walking on. But I almost died from it. Like I was like, oh my God, they're gonna murder me. I made Justice Scalia break his neck. What am I gonna do? And I'm sure he had no recollection of that, I'm sure, but it scared me. I got stories. Anyway, so back to this question. All right, so correct, Shelton. You are correct, sir. The answer is no. Now let's do 1895. This actually might help Stephen's question a little bit better. All right, let's do 1895. Same facts, same everything else. Just the year's 1895. I got stories. How would you answer this question in 1895? That's what we're thinking about. And I realize it's just taking a lot of class time, but I think this is a good use of time to recap. So we've done a lot of material so far. Oh, am I done? Am I back down to Conrad? Is that right? I think so. So another 10 seconds, Conrad. Okay. Oh boy. All right, Conrad, what's your answer, sir?
Yes. And my reasoning was, I believe this was the case where the courts had said that it's really not the court's place to question the constitutionality.
Which case was 1895? Oh, no. I'm talking to Conrad. Well, look at your outline. Look at your notes. What case is 1895? Well, look at the charts on page 20, 20 something in your books. Which case is 1895? Unfortunately, you need to know the years. Okay, so you want to, what's your answer then under EC Knight?
Antitrust Act.
Yeah, we just talked about it.
Oh, this was about the, so this would be improper because it wasn't a direct relationship between the labor conditions and the errors that were.
All right, so Conrad, let me ask you this question. What is, in my hypothetical question number 5, what is the actual thing that's being regulated?
The coal. Or
Well,
their intention of them passing.
No. What actually being regulated is actually regulating the shipment, or what actually being regulated?
It's the wages of the workers.
And what are the workers doing?
Mining the coal.
Okay. Manufacturing, right? It's not exactly manufacturing, but extraction, right? Whatever word you want to use. Commerce here is regulating the thing that comes before the commerce, right? Manufacture comes before commerce. Here, mining comes before commerce. Before you can ship this stuff, you have to actually mine it out of the earth. Right, so Conrad, just come back to you. Can Congress regulate the stuff that comes before the commerce?
No.
Why?
Because it's not commerce yet.
It's what kind of effect does it have on interstate commerce? One of two words. Bobby? What kind of effect does that have on interstate commerce?
The law itself would it be indirect?
Correct. This law has only an indirect effect on interstate commerce, right? Because you're regulating the wages, and maybe if you pay the workers more, they'll be more productive and make more coal and make everything great again, right? But this effect, if any, is indirect. Good? All right, let's do number 3. Same question. The year is 1903. Eight years later. Okie dokie. And this will be for Brian in about 10 seconds. All right, stop it there. Brian, remind us, what happened in 1903? What case am I?
The champion, the lottery.
The lottery ticket, correct. The lottery case. What happened there?
They banned the interstate shipment of the lottery ticket.
And what was the government's justification to ban these lottery tickets?
They're just immoral.
Immoral, right? This pestilence. See, the governor's saying, oh, we need online gambling, right? There's a morality issue here, right? It's a morality issue. Blake, I'll come to you now. So how did you answer this question, number 3?
Well, I was kind of torn. I put the wrong answer, but I know.
How do you know what the wrong answer is? I didn't tell you what the right answer is. I didn't tell anyone.
I put no because
You think the statute's unconstitutional?
yeah.
Okay, tell me why.
Well, one, under Ames, didn't they restrict that holding specifically to that case?
Well, that might be true. That's a fair point. But give me your that's not the best answer. That's correct. Give me your second answer.
For A?
What else? What other rationale other than limiting to one case? What other things are on your mind?
A lot of the lottery tickets are, they in that case they were regulating them moving across, literally like being shipped from, I think from Panama to like different states.
Yeah. Paraguay. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Panama's a different story.
Sorry,
that's on your mind maybe for other reasons.
Excuse me. And here, they're just regulating wages.
Okay.
That's
Okay, and let me call on you for a minute. I mentioned the question that moral conditions are low. Is that relevant to my question?
For this,
Yeah, I put that in there? I don't know if anyone even noticed it, but what's the effect of saying that the morality of having people work in these mines is low?
it's just like if you. Just like they wanted to, I guess like with the champions, like with the lottery, it's kind of like the way of, their way to deal with like the morality to like
Okay.
keep out like the lottery. Basically, this case kind of similar with like they wanted to keep the coal that was mined, I guess like immorally.
Okay. All right.
Like and in doing that, they wanted to do that by regulating the wages. So it's like the intention.
All right. So let's just see what people put. So most people put A. I think that's actually the better answer here. And I think the reason why is sort of what Ann and Blake were getting at. The court seemed to have sort of an exception that if Congress is trying to regulate morality, that's a broader authority, as if the federal government has a sort of police power. Okay. All right. Let's skip 4 and 5 for now. We'll come back to 4 and 5 maybe later. And we'll do 6 and all right. Okay, I think that's good. That's good for now. All right. Any questions on those questions? Yes, Michael.
On the last one, so like a pretext for like an act of Congress is okay if it's morality. Is that kind of like the?
Oh, you're asking a curious question. What if Congress says we're doing this to regulate morality, and in fact it's something else?
Mhm.
That's a good question. You know what? I think if you combine EC Knight with Champion, you would actually be able to scrutinize whether in fact it's about morality. I mean, we'll do cases later this semester. I'll just jump ahead. The Defensive Marriage Act, right? This was a federal law that defined marriage for federal law as one man, one woman. And the government said this. We had this law effectively to promote what might be called a sense of morality, the idea that the ideal set of marriage is a man and woman, and we need to encourage procreation in that capacity, children born to a husband and a wife. And the Supreme Court said, you might say that's your intention, but the real reason is you have what they call animus or hatred to gays and lesbians. And I say, how do you distinguish between promoting norms of morality versus animus and hatred? And this is actually a vigorous disagreement between Justice Alito in dissent and Justice Kennedy in the majority. I'll tell you, there's not a good answer here that can give you to kind of square it away, but scrutinizing concerns of morality will be a very common theme in some of the later cases involving gay rights. Did I answer your question? What you're expecting, I'm sure, but jumped ahead 100 years. Yes, Sabina, please go ahead.
So when we're looking at more of a morality issue, we should, when it's more indirect, I guess, that's when it becomes more problematic as opposed to being more direct.
I think that's right. Yeah.
When we look at policing power issues.
Yeah, anytime the effect becomes further from interstate commerce, the courts get more skeptical. I think is that what your question was?
Yeah, because like when it starts to go into like morality and police powers, the more indirect it is, the
more skeptical they get, I think. But that goes to a point, Sabina. Just to go back to my chart, I keep showing you the same graph. It's like the bullet graph, right? I keep showing you the same graph. But once you get to the 1937 or so, what you just said doesn't matter anymore, right? Once you get to Wickard, it doesn't matter how far the relationship is between the commerce and between the local activity and commerce, and we don't really care. But before 37, yes, it does matter. This is why, and I think Sabina's question is a good one. It illustrates why you have to know the law as it develops. If you just start today in 2025, you'll have no idea how we got there. This is why you never thought about this. Why in law school 1L to read all these old cases, right, from England in the 1700s? They're hard to read. Come on, I acknowledge it. They're hard to read. These language that doesn't make any sense. Why do you read the common law, the old stuff first, to see how you get to today's stuff, right? You start the old stuff in contracts, eventually get to the UCC and modern commercial law, but you can't make sense of the new stuff without knowing the old stuff. You need to know the background. And that's why law school 1L in particular is all old stuff. Randy and I, we teach this class more or less chronologically, which is not how it's often taught. If you ask your friends in their classes, they don't teach it like this. And, there are different ways, different approaches. But in our view, the chronology approach helps you figure out the development much better, right? What happened in each phase in American history. That's how we do it. But every professors are different. There's no one way to teach a class, that's for sure. I mean that sincerely. Everyone has different approaches. All right. So we've done cases. We've done, to review, EC Knight, Champion versus Ames, Hammer. Schechter Poultry, this was the sick chicken case, right? This case declared unconstitutional the National Industrial Recovery Act, the NRA, which regulated the wages of chicken slaughterers, butchers. The law also regulated could you take a chicken like this or take a sick chicken and take whatever you got. They said that's too far. There was an indirect effect of these chickens in interstate commerce, therefore the regulation was unconstitutional. Schechter Poultry, 1935, that was like the last stand, right? Where the court said, no, you can't do this. Because after 1935, things changed. Yes, Oscar?
It felt like that whole principle that we got from the Schechter Poultry case, that you can't make a chain of inferences to meet an end, really came to life in this tax case.
Right? Now it makes sense, right? In Jones and Laughlin Steel, Darby and Wickard, especially Wickard, they do the inferences, the chain, right? So all the stuff I told you goes out the window in 36. I mean, it's sort of strange. It's very hard to know when you're living in an important time where things are changing suddenly. I think we might be one right now. 36 was definitely one of these times. It's hard to know when you're on the inside because you don't have a sense of proportion. But there was a huge shift between 35 to 36 to 37. So what happened? Maybe you say this in American history, maybe you didn't. In 36, President Roosevelt won a landslide election. I mean, just a staggering election. He won both houses of Congress, the Democratic Party. And this was seen as kind of like this endorsement of Roosevelt's New Deal agenda. That is using the power of the federal government to try to bring the United States to a better economic condition. Whether it did that or not, different story. And Roosevelt, though, had a problem, right? He had control of the White House, he had control of both houses of Congress, but he didn't have the court. And the court still had a majority of, I'll say conservative, that's not the right word at the time, but justices who were skeptical of his agenda, at least in some part. So FDR had a proposal. This is very famous. He had his court packing plan. And he had like this. He says, you know what, you justices, you're working way too hard. There's just too much work. So I got it. I'm going to make stuff easy for you. Any justice over the age of 70 will just add a new seat to the court. And I can fill the seats, right? I'll fill them, right? So based on the numbers at the time, there'll be 6 new members of the court. So you go from 9 to 15. And so whatever small majority the conservatives had would vanish. Now to Brian's question a minute ago and a few others, pretext. Was Roosevelt really concerned about the workload of the justices? No. Did he really want to make their lives easier? No. He wanted to override them. He wanted to get more votes of his own people on the court, right? There's just this part people don't disagree. And there was actually a pretty big backlash to this. Chief Justice Hughes and others wrote a letter saying we think this is actually a very bad idea. In fact, it might be unconstitutional to add these members to the court. What he wanted to do is actually even trickier. He would say, well, you know what? We'll add new members if the old members are there. And the old members, you just won't sit in every case. You'll just sit to the side. We'll just keep 9 at any one point in time. And the other 6 will kind of just hang out. And maybe hear cases recusal. Right? So it's like not quite retirement, but yeah, you can't hear any cases. Like, what's a judge? Here's no cases. I don't know. Not much. But there was a backlash too among Democrats. They said, well, this is not good. Don't mess with the Supreme Court. You may not like the rulings, but they're still doing their best. And so Roosevelt's proposal never actually made it through Congress. But there's some thinking that it may have had an effect on the court. Now, there's a story that's not true. It's a myth. But I'll tell you the myth. The myth involves Justice Roberts, who changed his vote. No, not John Roberts, just Owen Roberts. And there's a famous case called West Coast Hotel v. Parrish. West Coast Hotel v. Parrish from Washington. It involved the minimum wage for a chambermaid, Elsie Parrish, who worked in a hotel in Wenatchee, Washington. Again, this is a state law, not a federal law. And earlier, the court had said that these state minimum wage laws were unconstitutional, but then the court sort of changed direction and upheld the state law. And who was a swing vote? Owen Roberts changed his vote. It was long viewed that this was a switch in time that saved 9. The switch in time that saved 9. You heard the phrase, a stitch in time saves 9, that if you prepare and are always very on top of things, you save a lot of effort. This was a switch in time that saved 9. That Owen Roberts changed his vote. Sorry, force of habit. Owen Roberts changed his vote in response to Roosevelt's pressure. We know now it's actually not true. And how do we know this? There were these books that justices kept where they wrote down who voted which way. And Owen Roberts changed his vote before the Roosevelt proposal. This is in the Cushman reading we gave you. So we know it's not true, but even if it's not true, it's still sort of emblematic. It represents what was happening. That Roosevelt put pressure on the court, and one reason or another, the court sort of responded by backing off. But for whatever reason, after 36, 37, you just look at these, boop, 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 right? Go straight down the line. Keep going. My sound effects are not very good, but my graph is. I told you this. We put I think weeks into this graph. This was not easy. You're like, oh, it's just a graph of the chart. This actually is a lot of work. We argued over some of these also at some length, Randy. We argue a lot. It's so funny. Whenever I see students like, yeah, Randy blames you for all the typo in his book, whenever they come up, I say, okay, that's fine. I'll take the blame. It's my fault. I think I'll blame for everyone. But once you get to 37, the court basically said, we're not going to be in the business of scrutinizing the federal government. In fact, Roosevelt's own advisors knew this. There's a guy named Rexford Tugwell. What a good name, Rexford Tugwell. He was a member of Roosevelt's administration, and he acknowledged that these New Deal policies require, quote, tortured interpretations of a document intended to prevent them. Tortured interpretations of a document intended to prevent. He realized that they're torturing the Constitution. They knew this. They could have amended the Constitution. It was easier just to add new judges. They didn't have to do that. So this was really what's often called the Revolution of 1937, where the entire Constitution changed in a fairly short period. With a span of, between 37 and 42, 5 years, that's not a long time. I mean, just go back up. How many decades between E.C. Knight and Check the Pulse? Like 40 years? This is 5 years. It's like almost one law school career, right? You're in law school 3 or 4 years. It's like one law school career. The law changed overnight. It's truly stunning. So let's do, who am I up to? Brenda, you next? Okay, let's start with Jones and Laughlin Seal, please. Give me the facts there.
So, Laughlin Seal, they were charged with violating the National Labor Relations.
What is the NLRA, the National Labor Relations Act? Very important law.
They basically wanted to prevent unfair labor practices.
Okay. And what was an unfair labor practice?
Essentially, Laughlin Seal was firing people who, I guess, wanted to create a union.
Correct. Very good. Thank you, Brenda. Right. So the NLRA was a very important statute, perhaps one of the most important statutes passed in the 20th century, that guarantees the rights of workers to organize. Before this law, workers would organize union and they just would be fired. Right. They would just fire them. This law guaranteed by statute the right of organization. Okay. So then, Michael, why did the steel company argue that this law is unconstitutional?
Because it was about, it wasn't about the commerce. It was kind of more about what was going on inside their business.
So if you were, again, a lawyer in 1937 for the steel company, what precedents are you citing to that Congress can't do this?
Oh, I'm going to probably E.C. Knight.
Yes, sir.
Dagenhart.
Yes, sir.
And then probably Schechter.
Yes, sir. Those are good precedents, right? Now, let me ask Jake this another question. If you're a Roosevelt's lawyer and you have E.C. Knight and you have Hammer and you have Schechter Poultry in the books, how do you justify this law? Well, what precedent do you cite to defend it? I think Michael said a couple good precedents on his side. You represent the government here. What precedents do you cite that this law is okay?
I guess one of them would be I want to say Schechter.
Well, Schechter declared the law unconstitutional, the National Recovery Act.
I don't know what I'd cite to, but I know their reasoning as to why they did it.
Yeah.
Oh, Knox.
Knox is good. What else?
I say Champion v. Ames.
Champion of morality, maybe. McCulloch, yeah, I guess that McCulloch. But if you're citing McCulloch and Champion's other cases, Nick, do you have to basically say that E.C. Knight and Hammer were wrong?
No.
No? Why not?
It's just,
Again, E.C. Knight was specifically about labor conditions. They said you can't regulate labor conditions. Here they're regulating local labor conditions. How do you get around that?
they justify it by saying, well, like, they can't regulate all labor relations, but the ones that really burden and affect them, they can regulate.
But this was a sugar monopoly that had a huge portion of the industry. I mean, that seems pretty significant. Huh. Teddy, what are you going to do? You're the government lawyer. What are you actually going to ask the court to do here?
I think the answer involves the limiting principles.
Okay, tell me more.
In the Laughlin, Judge Laughlin case, the decision came with limiting principles that only applied the decisions, or their framework for making the decision to what was specific to that case and holding.
Chanel, let me ask you a question like this. So you're a government lawyer, right? And there are some precedents that aren't really on your side. And you're at the U.S. Supreme Court. What do?
We make distinctions between them.
You can try to distinguish them, or you're all fighting it.
Overrule it.
Change the law, huh? What did the court do here, Chanel?
Well, I think what they didn't overrule Hammer and Dynamite,
Not expressly.
but they said it was about the goods. I don't think they were using like a pretext like the other cases, some other cases were.
One more question, Chanel. Did the court here apply the direct effects test?
Yes.
And how do they understand direct effects?
I think that they said they were regulating the labor conditions for the goods.
Oh, let me ask a question. Did they apply the direct effects the same way in EC Knight and in Jones and Laughlin Seal?
No.
No, okay, that's my asking. So tell me why they're different.
I think they differed because was this broader?
Not broader, Lauren. How'd they apply the direct effects maybe a little bit differently in this case versus EC Knight?
I want to say they didn't differentiate, or they didn't reject the original direct, like differentiation of effects. I feel like they just leaned more into the burden or obstruction part.
Okay. Steven?
Don't they use a different test in that?
What's the test they use, Steven?
That like if it's a less than substantial relation to interstate commerce.
They changed the test. They changed the test.
I didn't know. I thought that was introduced in Darby.
You're not wrong. But what the court's doing here is they're hinting that direct doesn't actually mean direct anymore. And you're nodding, you see what I'm saying? The way you look at it is like this. Jones and Laughlin Seal set up Darby a couple years later. All right, and let's just walk through this, right? The court says that Congress can eliminate any burdens or obstructions in commerce. Okay? And the court says that Congress can regulate local activity that has a close and substantial relation. This is the word Stephen used a minute ago. A close and substantial relation to interstate commerce. Lauren, is substantial relation, substantial effect, the same as direct effect? Everyone see that? The terminology matters. They shifted from saying a direct effect or a direct relationship, and now they're saying a substantial effect or substantial relationship. Effect and relationship mean the same thing. They go from direct to substantial. Everyone see that? Maybe even notice it. Anna, let me ask you a question, please. What is the difference between direct effects and substantial effects?
Well, substantial broadens the direct because even if it's not necessarily like directly related to commerce, if it affects the interstate commerce in a big way as a
like a general,
then it's good.
It's good. It does not be direct really, just even in the ballpark. So I'll ask you this question. Is there a direct relationship or direct effect between banning unions and shipping goods across state lines? Is there a direct relationship there?
No.
No, there's not. Okay. Follow-up question, Anna. Is there a substantial relationship that if you have banning labor unions, might that maybe have some sort of effect in interstate commerce?
Yes.
Yeah. Correct. What this test allows to happen, right? What this test allows to happen is effectively a much weaker relation between the local activity and interstate commerce, or means and ends. Someone asked about that before, right? That you only need to have, a weak relation between the means and the ends. If you ban local unions, that might make the workers less effective. And if the workers are less effective, there's going to be more burdens in commerce. There's fewer goods being shipped, and we don't want that. We want to have very free-flowing commerce, so we're going to make sure these workers can unionize. Right? That's not direct; it's indirect. So Lauren, you're correct. They don't quite kill the substantial effects test here. You're right, Chanel. You're also correct. But they're using direct effects, but they're using the word substantial, and that shifts it. Substantial means, it's close enough, right? It's close enough for government work. Later, we'll do something called intermediate scrutiny and use the word substantial. It's like, well, is there a substantial relationship? That's close enough. Yes, ma'am. Did you raise your hand? I'm sorry.
I may be pointing like the obvious out, but
Please.
if they had used substantial instead of a direct like test in the other ones, then those could have been deemed constitutional too.
Yeah, I think you're right. If EC Knight had looked for, is there a substantial relationship between locally manufactured sugar and the price in the market nationwide? Yeah, that would be fine. The law had been upheld. So you're right. What the SGR lawyers basically had to do was say, well, let's limit EC Knight to those facts. Let's limit the other cases to those facts, and let's have this much broader conception of federal power. All right. Who said limiting principle before? Someone said that a few minutes ago. Teddy, what was the limiting principle in Jones and Laughlin CLA? You want to come back to that?
It can't be, I guess the decision cannot be, or the holding cannot be too remote to confuse between national and local regulations.
Correct. Yeah, there's this very famous line. I'll just read you part of it. The court says, you can't obliterate, you can't destroy the distinction between what's national and what's local. So the court says, look, there's going to be some limit. We won't tell you what that limit is, but there is that limit. It exists somewhere. And you have to respect it. So the court's at least saying, yeah, we're going to do this, right? We're going to do this, but there might be some other case where it goes too far. That was in 1937. 5 years later, they basically say, never mind. There really is no limit. But again, you don't know this at the time. And again, the composition of the court changes. New members were added. People changed their minds. So even in 37, maybe they thought that, right? They didn't know what would come later, right? The thing about being a Supreme Court justice is you don't know what's coming down the pipe in a couple of years. Whatever you write today, you have no idea how effect what happens 5 years later. It's impossible to know. Say, oh, we'll limit this to one case. No, that never works. You can't do that. You don't know what's going to come down the pipe next. If this class for the last 10 years changed quite a bit. Torts, similar, right? Contracts hasn't changed much. This class, quite different. Every year I teach it's a little bit different. So it's a hard class to teach. It's always updating. Syllabus is always moving around, new cases. Even I have to teach old cases differently because of what happens now. All right. I could never talk about birthright citizens before. Maybe I will this year, right? Just still figuring this stuff out. All right. Questions on Jones and Laughlin seal? All right. Let's go on. Darby is an even further shift. Yeah, I think Damon, you're next. Damon, you want to give me the facts, please, from Darby?
Sure. So this is a challenge to the Fair Labor Standards Act.
Good. What's the Fair Labor Standards Act? We did the National Labor Relations Act, the NLRA. This is the FLSA, the Fair Labor Standards Act.
It regulates wages and hours.
I'm sorry?
It regulates like the products, the manufactured products that come from like workers that are.
Yeah, and what's the actual thing that's being regulated?
I guess manufactured products.
But what about it? What about the workers is being regulated?
The wages and the hours.
Yes, correct. The wages, correct. Very good. So this was a statute that regulated the wages, how much these people are being paid. In Hammer, Damon, did the court uphold a regulation of the wages of the workers?
Yes.
Yes. What happened in Hammer?
So they said that the federal government.
Right. So I asked the question: did they uphold the regulation of wages in Hammer? No. Okay. So Rick, you're a lawyer for the government, right? Congratulations, you've been promoted. They've all been fired. It's not your job, right? Exaggerating it slightly. And you go to court and you say, Mr. Chief Justice, Hammer versus Dagenhart said the government can't regulate wages. We've done it again. How do you justify that, Rick? How can Congress pass a statute that's expressly contrary to Hammer versus Dagenhart? I mean, are we just ignoring courts now? I mean, what's going on?
So, by, I guess, introducing the new test and taking on more of the substantial effects test as opposed to the direct effects test, which would give them a broader scope of what they
So you'd say that Jones and Laughlin Seal sort of didn't overrule Hammer, but sort of weakened the precedent? Maybe you might say that?
Yes, kind of like introduced a new train of thought that they could maybe approach.
Yeah. So the Supreme Court often says that until not the royal we, until the Supreme Court overrules a precedent, it's still good law. Right? Until the Supreme Court overrules a precedent, it's still good law. You can't anticipate that a court might overrule this decision. You can't say, well, this precedent's been weakened, but the government here said, yeah, we don't really care, right? That we're going to anticipate that the court, as it constitutes now, would uphold the statute. And they were right, Paulina. What did the court do here with Hammer versus Dagenhart? Overruled, flat overruled. Not even, Hammer was 1918, 1941, so about 20-something years, 23 years, overruled. Why they overruled, Paulina?
They overruled because they used the direct test and they transitioned over to the substantial test, which
Substantial effects test.
yeah, the substantial effects test, which essentially, like Rick said, allowed the test and it allowed Congress the power to do more than just protect interstate commerce, but also protect or also regulate intrastate local activities, as long as they had that substantial effect on interstate commerce.
Correct. So to Lauren's question a minute ago, and you were not wrong, and Chanel also being a little confused. This is where they clearly introduce the substantial effects test, but they basically kind of apply it indirectly in the Jones and Laughlin case a couple of years ago. Do you see that now? Okay, very good. Now, you're not wrong. You did your reading correctly, and I don't want to criticize you. You did your reading correctly, but Paulina's correct here. This is where they introduce squarely the substantial effects test, right? So long as some local activity has a substantial effect on interstate commerce, that's good enough. So what happens here? If the workers in a state are not earning enough wages, maybe they'll be a little bit less careful. Maybe they won't do good work. Maybe they'll create defective goods. Maybe the steel will be defective, and maybe that steel can affect national industry, and people will have railroad tracks that bend, and I don't know what else you do with steel, right? That was enough for the court. Now, again, is there a limiting principle here? Stephen, did the court identify much of a limiting principle in the Darby case?
I don't think so.
No, they didn't. Tell me why, please.
Well, they say, they cite McClung, Maryland, and they say power of Congress over interstate commerce is not confined to commerce in the states. It extends those activities interstate. Basically saying the substantial effects test and don't. Usually the case will literally say confined or limiting, and that's not it.
Stephen, let me ask you a follow-up. Is the court here going to scrutinize what the real motivation, what the real purpose is behind this law?
Well, they do talk about the motivation a little bit, but they say that this is a good, they say that the motive and purpose of press regulation is good, basically, so it's not being scrutinized the way it should be, I think.
Correct. Yeah. So there's not much of a limiting principle here. The court says whatever their motive and purpose, right, we're not going to scrutinize it. Unless this violates some clear command of the Constitution, this is fine. Joseph, let me ask you a question, please. Is this law really about regulating interstate commerce, or are they just trying to regulate local labor conditions? What's the real motivation here with this law? But does it ban the shipment of these goods, or does it ban the labor condition? So let me ask the question again. What's this law really about? Correct. This law is really about labor conditions, but the court says it's not for us to scrutinize that. We're going to just take Congress at face value. If they tell us that this is about regulating interstate commerce and affecting interstate commerce, that's good enough. Brian?
Darby different than Knox. Knox is saying that Congress does it, it's fine.
Yeah. So Darby doesn't quite go can't reach out as far as Knox, but gets in that ballpark. Right? Darby is the furthest statement since Knox. And then we'll get to Wickard in a few minutes, goes even further. Does that make sense, Brian? Okay. Yes, Anna.
So does it not go as far as Knox because Knox is specifically talking about like all of their enumerated powers and Darby is just talking about the commerce clause?
That's actually it's a good one. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why Knox goes further, but Knox is like they're saying there are no limits at all. At least Darby didn't overrule. Darby did not overrule Jones and Laughlin seal, and Jones and Laughlin seal acknowledged that there's still some limits. But Darby says a very famous line that the 10th Amendment is basically a truism, right? In other words, the 10th Amendment doesn't really tell us anything. It's either Congress has the power or the states have the power. The Darby Court doesn't see much role for the 10th Amendment at all. In other words, if Congress wants to regulate it, they probably can. But still here, there's an important limitation that may not be obvious in Darby. There has to be some sort of economic activity that itself, that particular activity affects interstate commerce, right? That the labor conditions at this one steel factory, Jones and Laughlin Steel, affects interstate commerce. The next case, Wickard, that's where things goes off the rails, right? That's where it doesn't matter even if one farmer does it, because we look more broadly. All right, questions on Darby? All right, let's go on to Wickard. I got this great picture. I love this picture. Let's see. There he is. Okay, that's Wickard, and that's Filburn with the wheat. That's my favorite pictures in the entire book. Okay, Dalen, help me out, sir. What are the facts in Wickard v. Filburn, one of the most important cases in the 20th century?
So the Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1938.
AAA, yep.
Which limited wheat production.
Yep.
And so Filburn was a farmer, and they basically said, you know, you're limited to grow this much wheat, and anything in excess, you're going to have to pay the government for.
Pay a penalty, right?
Right.
Okay, let me just stop you there, Dalen. Those are good facts. This was during the Depression, right? People were hungry. People were starving. It was a dust bowl, right? Why on earth would the government limit how much food could be produced? People are hungry and starving. Wouldn't you want more food? What's the rationale for this law?
So that they could raise the price of wheat.
What happens when you restrict supply?
The price goes up and demand might go up.
Yeah, this is basic econ 101, right? If you limit the supply, the price will go up. Again, Dalen, if people are hungry and they're all poor and they don't have food, why would the government take an action to limit the supply and make food more expensive?
Try to boost the economy, I guess.
But how? I mean, if people don't have money for food, you're making food more expensive. I'm just trying to think this one out here.
Maybe on wheat that's being exported. You know, you're bringing more money into the state.
Well, these are domestic farmers. This guy was in Ohio. Anyone else want to take a stab? There's an answer. I'm not trying to be pretty difficult. Michael.
Does it get the farmers paid more so they can hire people and put them to work? Is that it?
So it helps the farmers, but not people buying the wheat. Is that your answer?
Yeah.
Right. So and again, it's not an economics class. I'm not trying to make you understand this, but the thinking was that the way to help the American people was by increasing the conditions of labor, making jobs pay more, making these farmers have more money, and then perhaps that might help people. I'm not going to get into the debate. It didn't really work. These were very, anyway, I'll just leave it there. These are policies that didn't really work, but that was the thinking behind the policy. Okay? The court doesn't really care about the economics, and that's actually very important. They're not saying, wow, this makes no freaking sense. Why are you making food more expensive when people are starving? They didn't say that, so it actually doesn't matter here. But the problem for Mr. Filburn, Farmer Filburn, right, is he wasn't in the business of exporting his wheat, as Dalen said. Trent, where was this wheat going, or at least according to the record?
This is personal use.
Personal wheat, right? What do you mean by personal wheat? Who was using it?
So he was using it.
He was using it. Did he eat it himself?
Yes, it was used for his own operations.
Yeah. Who else was eating the wheat? Just to spell it out.
I can imagine like livestock.
Livestock. Yeah. Come on, livestock, right? So he's using this wheat on his farm. I'm just going to pause here. That's what the record says. It is almost certainly true that he was shipping wheat out of his farm. The amount of wheat he was growing was so substantial that there's no way it was for his own farm's consumption. I've had students, they were Aggies, they confirmed this. The amount of wheat, I asked them, how many bushels of wheat? I don't know what a bushel is, right? How many bushels of wheat? He's like, there's no way he had this for his animal. So I have an A&M authority that this was not for his own, can't get better than that. This was not for his own consumption. But those facts were not in the record. Those facts were not in the record, so we will, as any good appellate court, we limit ourselves to the record. And in the record, he grew wheat solely for the consumption of his own. Hey, Jerry. You ever heard of Jerry Bernberg? He's a professor here. So he was growing wheat solely for his own consumption. Everyone with me? Okay. And the government said, well, you know what, Mr. Farmer Filburn, you're growing way too much wheat. We're going to assess you a penalty to penalize you for the growing of this excess inventory of wheat. And by the way, who set the quotas? Anyone who knows this? Who actually set the quotas of how much wheat it can grow? Stephen?
The farmers.
The farmers. Ain't that something, right? The farmers themselves decide how much they can grow. So they're basically, it's a cartel. I mean, this, if you said economics, it's a cartel, right? They are cartelizing. They are restricting how much they sell, and they're restricting the price which can be sold. What industry wouldn't want this? That'd be awesome. Imagine you're in a business and you can say, all right, everyone, imagine every gas station in town had a cartel that, all right, we're all going to charge the same price, and you can't charge more of this. We're going to have the same price for gas. It's great for businesses, right? They love it. Except Mr. Filburn. He wasn't on the team, right? He wasn't on the plan. He said, screw you guys. I'm going to not listen to your limits. I'm going to grow my own wheat and feed it to my family and chickens, and he was shipping off the farm. But that we'll pretend that didn't happen, right? Again, the court almost doesn't want that fact because that fact complicates things. The court wanted to address this cleanly. All right. If you notice in the book, we say, according to the record, I put them in very deliberately because I know that's not true. The Aggies confirmed it. Okay. This was a hard case for the justices because they realized once you go to this case, you're never going back. Once you uphold locally grown wheat that never leaves the farm, you can't control it. You can't undo that, right? You can't like say, never mind. This will be sort of the point of no return. And it was a difficult case. The authoring justice is a guy named Robert Jackson. He was a remarkable human being. He never actually graduated from law school. He started, I think, at Albany, never actually finished. He worked in the Roosevelt administration. He was the Solicitor General. That's the government lawyer before the Supreme Court. He worked before the as Attorney General. He went to the Supreme Court. He was also the chief prosecutor at Nuremberg. He prosecuted the Nazis for war crimes. Just a really remarkable guy. And his decisions are just they age well. A lot of his decisions just are studied for years to come. So initially, Justice Jackson was like, look, let's drop this entire direct, indirect test, the substantial effects test. Let's just drop all this stuff and just be honest with what we're doing. If Congress upholds a regulation, so if Congress passes a regulation, that's good enough for us. If Congress decides that this is useful for the national economy, who are we to second guess? And that was his sort of initial inclination. And there's an expression, the opinion wouldn't write. You ever hear this expression? Sometimes we want to write something. Oh, I'm going to write this great thing. You sit down, and it just doesn't write. It doesn't come together. It doesn't fit. All right? And this one didn't write. So they actually had the case re-argued. They had the case brought back to lawyers. And instead of just getting rid of all sort of scrutiny of this direct effects test, he expanded the substantial effects test. He made it bigger. He made it even broader to broaden the scope of federal power. Are you feeling okay today? Okay, good. Glad you feel. Both my daughters have the flu. They're home sick today. It's terrible. going around. All right, so Evelyn, what did Jackson do in Wickard? What does aggregate mean? Aggregation. What does that word mean? Right. Aggregate means you add together, right? A little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of this. You're making a stew, right? So what's the aggregation principle, ma'am?
So basically, like in this case, they were looking at the top level about all the other, like, small farms that were getting solutions and kind of put them together on the same level.
Correct. Again, in Darby and Jones and Laughlin steel, the court said, let's look at this particular steel mill, and let's say if the effects of this steel mill, if the activities of this local steel mill have a substantial effect on interstate commerce. Those are both large entities that in fact shipped a lot of steel across state lines. Right? This Jones and Laughlin, they shipped, was it 75%? They shipped stuff across state lines. There's no question stuff was going across state lines. Darby also, I think it was a lumber manufacturer, right? They made wood stuff. They shipped stuff across state lines. But Wickard, at least according to the record, Mr. Farmer Filburn did not. But what the court says is this, and just follow me here, right? The court says that, look, even if one farmer's wheat doesn't really have a substantial effect on interstate commerce, if Congress adds together, if Congress aggregates all of these local farmers who are doing the same thing that Mr. Filburn's doing, and if all of them decide to grow this excess wheat that they keep on farms, that will have a substantial effect on interstate commerce. Why? Think of it this way. If you can grow extra wheat, you're not buying that extra wheat in the marketplace. And if you're not buying the wheat in the marketplace, that creates burdens for interstate commerce. You're not buying this awesome wheat from Michigan. You're using your own wheat. That's a problem. And if you just do this and this and this and this, it burdens interstate commerce. Again, the logic doesn't actually exist. You're just almost like making up hypotheticals. But hypothetically speaking, how could Farmer Filburn using his local wheat affect a farmer in, Texas? Well, maybe if Filburn didn't grow so much wheat, the farmer in Texas would have a new market to ship to, and the farmer in Texas can send his wheat there, and that creates more interstate commerce. Does everyone see that kind of, it's not real, right? You're basically making up all these hypotheticals. And what Justice Jackson basically says is, if we can make up a series of hypotheticals by which a local farmer's actions might affect the farmer in Texas, that's good enough. That is what the aggregation principle does. You, in your head, imagine, hypothetically speaking, if all these farmers across the country did what Mr. Filburn did, how that affect the farmer in Texas. No evidence is needed, right? So you don't have to actually show this. You don't have to prove it. It's just hypothetically speaking. Yes, Brian. So you're asking a very good question. If you ask myself and Randy, not everyone agrees with this one, I'll just be candid. We think that Wickard was limited to economic activity, commercial activity, right? Farmer Filburn was growing this for commercial purposes. But what happens if instead of growing wheat on your farm, which is destined for sale, you grow marijuana, which at least until recently was illegal? Could Congress regulate locally grown marijuana that was never destined for sale? It was not commercial activity. That is number, at the bottom, Gonzales v. Raich, 2005. Randy argued that case with the Supreme Court. So the way that Randy and I have long read Wickard is that the aggregation principle is limited to economic or commercial activity. The court would not make that principle clear, at least until Lopez in 95. So, Brian, you're asking the exact right question. Jackson's opinion doesn't say it so expressly, but that's how we, at least people like me, have read that decision. So, very good point. Yes, Shelton, go ahead.
Isn't the aggregation principle here similar to what Paul Cushman argued about Obamacare, that they're trying to kill the commerce so that they can be regulated with commerce?
You're jumping ahead a week, but you're exactly right. So who's Paul Clement? Paul Clement's a lawyer. He came to my class last semester. He's a very smart lawyer. Argued the Affordable Care Act case. And what he and Randy and others argued is that a regulation of commerce assumes that commerce actually exists. If Congress makes you buy a commercial product and pushes you into the stream of commerce, oh, by the way, CivPro, stream of commerce, you're welcome. That's common law, by the way. Why can there be federal jurisdiction on the stream of commerce? The necessary and proper clause in the Commerce Clause. You're welcome. You never knew that, did you? Asahi, right? Just blew your minds. Everything's common law. It comes back to us. You guys are just posers, right? It starts all here. Diversity jurisdiction, that's us, right? But Shelton's question is a good one. Let me come back to it. I ignored it. Right. So what the court eventually would say is that you can't push someone into the stream of commerce. You have to enter it voluntarily. You have to engage in a commercial transaction. That's why, in our view, Wickard and the aggregation principle has to be pegged to, are you engaging in a commercial transaction, an economic transaction, buying or selling or trading something, right? Just sitting on your couch doing nothing is not economic activity. But we'll get to the Obamacare case. Okay.
Do you think that had the time been different, like, 'cause this was like Great Depression into World War II, do you think that like they would have been more like limiting on this like expansion?
It's a good question. You can't separate a Supreme Court case from the year which is decided. So yes, Jones and Laughlin, Seal and Darby were about the Depression. Pearl Harbor happened in 1941. By 42, the federal government was in World War II, full on. I think it was very unlikely that you had a bunch of Roosevelt appointees saying that no, Congress doesn't have this power. They were regulating every facet of the economy from top to bottom to get the United States on a war footing. For good or bad, that's what was happening. And also, again, I made this point a little bit. These were all Roosevelt appointees. Jackson appointed by Roosevelt. These are people picked because they shared Roosevelt's philosophy in view of the courts and the law. It's not surprising that things changed. Once he gets past 37, some of the older Republican appointees retired. And at that point, FDR made 9 appointments to the court. 9. The entire court was his, right? He made 9 appointments to the court. Ironically, they didn't always rule in favor of him. There are some issues in which they fragmented on speech and religion otherwise. But they were pretty lockstep on federal power. And by the way, they hated each other. The Roosevelt appointees, you had Douglas, you had Frankfurt, you had Jackson. They just hated each other. They were always fighting. They called them scorpions in a bottle because they were kind of trapped and they couldn't escape. And they were kind of like sticking at each other. They did not like each other at all. I don't think much of our justices they actually like each other. I think it's true. Who knew this? Who knew that Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh went to the same high school? Did anyone know this? Yeah, they never talk about it. Do you know they clerked together on the Supreme Court? They never talk about it.
They went at the same time to the same high school?
They were like 1 year apart in high school. I think Gorsuch might be a year older or younger. It was a very small Catholic prep school in Maryland.
They have to know each other and hate each other.
They do. Has anyone ever seen Neil Gorsuch's yearbook? No. I mean, they just don't like each other. And I don't think Barrett likes either of them. So I think the 3 Trump appointees just don't like each other. They never, it's, oh, we get along so well. They would say this. And that's true enough, but just like personally, they're very different. And I think Kavanaugh and Gorsuch don't like each other at all.
Is it true that Alita's gonna sit down?
Oh, I have no idea. I have no idea. Most popular man in the court is Thomas. Everyone adores him. People might not like him, but he knows everyone's name in the building. He's respectful to everyone. From the elevator operator to the librarian, knows everyone, and they all adore him. Even if people don't like him outside. But I don't think Kavanaugh and Gorsuch like each other. I don't think Barrett likes him either. I think there's a lot of friction there. Just it's very, they pretend. Oh, we love each other. Yeah, they're happy, but and it's over the leaks. People leaking stuff. I think there's a lack of trust now at the court. It's a very different place than it was a couple of years ago. All right. Back to Wickard. All right, so the court adopts the so-called aggregation principle. So even if Filburn's own contribution is trivial, if we look at the broad scope of all people being regulated, everyone put together, we aggregate them, that's enough of federal power. As a result, the court upheld the Agricultural Adjustment Act. And there wasn't much limiting principle on Wickard. The only limiting principle, this actually was Brian's question a minute ago, I think, is that when you're aggregating activity, that's in my view, commercial activities. That you couldn't regulate inactivity, this is Shelton's point, that someone not buying something, you couldn't make them buy broccoli, for example. But this was an issue that wasn't clearly discussed in the cases. All right, let's see what you want to do here. All right, questions for me on Wickard. Probably the most important case of the 20th century. By the way, Jones and Laughlin seal was important too. I don't want to downplay it. That basically put the final nail in the coffin of the direct effect test. They didn't quite get rid of it, but they more or less got rid of it. All right. So let's just again sort of recap from EC Knight, direct effects test. Champion versus Ames, morality. Hammer versus Dagenhart, pretext. Schechter Poultry, direct effect test again. NLRB says, no, we're not looking at direct effects, we're looking at substantial effects. Darby, substantial effects clearly. Wickard, aggregation principle. You got all that? That's so 6 or 7 cases you have to know cold. I mean, you have to know this entire chart by the end of this unit, but you'll know this better than anyone else in the country. I'm telling you, people don't study cases like this chronologically. You look at other common case books, they jump around. It's actually very hard to follow. It drives me crazy. Okay. Right, Adi? Am I right about that one?
I took commo, didn't Professor. It doesn't. We also didn't go over all those cases. But she did the normal thing where the way that you talked about Wickard and stuff is like, doesn't this make sense? Like,
Well, I mean, look, it makes sense if your starting point is the federal government should have this broad authority.
But she does the whole. Do you really think the court should be able to scrutinize?
Right, and that's it's a value judgment, right? If you believe that the court doesn't have a role in doing this, then perhaps Justice Jackson's right. We should just get at the business of scrutinizing it all. My challenge with Wickard is the test they made is not really a test. It's a test in name only. It's a test, it's like a loaded dice. You ever play with a loaded dice, no matter which way you roll, comes up with sevens, right? It's a test where the end is predetermined. And so you sort of just go through the motions, right? Litigating, if you're ever a litigator, litigating a Commerce Clause case under this test is basically impossible. You're going to lose. So in other words, just be honest. Say, all right, do whatever you want. Don't make us waste our time thinking there's a limit. But what's important here, the fact that Jackson left open some limitation gave us the Obamacare decision, which is, there are actually some limits, right? So when the court leaves doors open, they tend to be entered decades later, long after they're dead. I mean, Wickard was 42. You wouldn't get a limitation until 95, right, in Lopez. So 50-something years passed. All the people that were long dead. Okay. Questions on Wickard? All right, so let's jump ahead 20 years. And we go, I'll give a half hour left, right? We're on time. And we go from the New Deal court to the Warren court. Who is Warren? Chief Justice Earl Warren. Warren was former governor of California. He was appointed by President Eisenhower to the Supreme Court in 1952. Off by a year, right? Sort of ironic. Eisenhower put Warren on the Supreme Court because Warren was the governor of California who was going to challenge him in the next elections. He said, look, I want to get Warren out of the political sphere. I'm going to put him in the Supreme Court. And Eisenhower said this was the worst mistake I ever made in my life. He said that many times. He's reported saying it. Warren, even though he was Republican, proved to be extremely liberal. And his perhaps biggest contribution concerns civil rights cases. His basically first year in the court was Brown v. Board of Education. First year. He basically got to the court and did Brown. And we'll do that after spring break, but it was a very significant case. But around the same time that the Supreme Court was deciding civil rights cases, Congress was getting involved. This was the presidency of John F. Kennedy and Lyndon B. Johnson. And they passed a series of significant civil rights laws. You had the Civil Rights Act of 1964. You had the Fair Housing Act. You had the Voting Rights Act. All these laws were passed in a fairly compressed period of time. And these were designed to help integrate blacks back in society after Jim Crow, okay? Perhaps the biggest of all the laws was Civil Rights Act of 64. Who am I up to? Sabina, you next? I called you in today? You're next. No, Evelyn, you're next. Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. So my question to you, what was Title II of the Civil Rights Act of 1964? What did that statute do? Title II of the Civil Rights Act of 64. Brett,
Yes, sir. So
Title II of the Civil Rights Act of 64, please.
it says that all persons shall be entitled to the full and equal enjoyment of the goods, services, facilities, privileges, advantages, and accommodations of any place of public accommodation without discrimination or segregation on the ground of race, color, religion, or national origin.
Okay. Brett, you probably maybe did some torts. What's a public accommodation? What do we call those things?
Like hotels, inns.
Common carriage, does that phrase ring a bell? Like trains. So there's a long tradition, and people disagree about how long it is, but there's a long tradition that places of public accommodation, hotels, restaurants, inns, boats, conveyances, basically have monopolies, right? Imagine you have a ferry between A and B. Think of Gibbons versus Ogden, right? You can't get a ferry anywhere else. That's the only ferry that does the route. The government says you must basically take anyone willing to pay. It's a common carrier. And the government says we will set the rates, but you get a monopoly on this. States had long regulated common carriers, but now Congress was trying to regulate a common carrier. So Ryan, talk to me at the heart of Atlanta Motel in Atlanta. But what was sort of distinctive about this hotel?
So they weren't allowing African American speakers to rent rooms there.
Correct.
And roughly about 75% of their guests were from out of town.
Yeah. Did anyone see the movie The Green Book? Came out a couple years ago. So this was a book that was published for decades. I've actually looked at editions of this from Houston, that version from Houston, which basically told African American travelers, here's where you can stop. These were the restaurants that will cater to you, right? These are the hotels that will put you a room. These are the salons that will cut your hair. So if you were traveling in this time and you were a black person, you needed this book to tell you where to stop, because you stop at the wrong place, you have some issues. They won't let you in, they won't serve you, and maybe worse. Congress sought to eliminate the burden on interstate commerce, right? Person traveling from New York to Florida, for example, have to go through Georgia. You can't skip the state of Georgia. And people who are traveling need a place to stay. Okay, so we get, this is actually a photograph of the, I'll only show you the picture. I have a good story. Let's see, do I have that picture here? No, I don't have it here. So there's this very famous picture. Oh, where is it? If I can find it. There's this very famous picture of the Heartlanta Hotel. Oh, here it is. I just show it over here. Yeah. This is a crazy story. So one year I showed this picture in class. So see, there's this woman in a boat. I didn't get this right. I think the student said that was her mom. Like I met one day the student that was her mom in the boat. Crazy story.
Really? No.
I'm like, it may not have been here, but I know I showed that picture somewhere. And someone said that's like my mom. Because she had the picture in her home somewhere.
No.
Yeah.
I'm not like saved that picture. No way.
I had another. We'll do another case this semester involving a segregated school, and one girl said my mom went to that school. Was it your mom in the boat? Oh, was it the aunt? Yeah. Oh, you guys are so good, but I'm close, right? Yeah. These stories sometimes fade. Okay, but I'm in the ballpark, right? Was it the aunt? What year was that from? This is funny. So students can fact check me. My stories, they changed weird here. I'm not trying to be dishonest. My memory fades, but that did happen, right? I'm not in the ballpark. Someone's aunt was in this boat, which is a crazy story. This is now a huge Hilton hotel, I think, in downtown Atlanta. All right, so a lawsuit was brought by the owner of the Heart of Atlanta Motel. And he was actually an attorney himself, as I recall. And he argued that even if the movement of people on the highways might be commerce, that a hotel is a stationary thing, right? This hotel doesn't get up and move, right? The rooms are where they are. This is not commerce among the several states. And Congress can't regulate, this woman in this boat. Maybe this is Waters of the United States. Maybe they can regulate. I don't know. Okay. He lost 9-0. This one wasn't even close. Brian, you next? Brian, can you walk me through the court's holding, please?
Wasn't the court found that, like, so if Harvard Scope was commerce because of the people coming in and out of town from different states?
Correct.
that Commerce has authority over
Correct, right. So what the court holds here, right? What the court holds here is that people traveling from state A to state B have to stop. They have to sleep somewhere, right? You can't, I guess you can sleep in your car, I suppose, but people need places to stay, places of public accommodation, to eat, need to sleep, and so on. Congress has the power to promote this transfer of people from state A to state B. But they can also eliminate any burdens or any obstructions on that commerce. And one such burden on that commerce would be segregation hotels that won't service certain customers. And in this case, they said that almost 75% of the guests were from out of state. So even though the hotel was local, this local activity had a blank. Alexandra, this local activity had a blank. Fill in the blank, please. What are we talking about all day? Blank. Fill in the blank. Huh? Be more specific. I heard that. Oh, I thought you were whispering something. Okay. I believe you. Local activity had a blank effect. Tell me more, Alexandra. I'm looking for a different word than negative. What test have we been talking the last half hour or so? Ah, so the local activity has a substantial effect on, fill in the last sentence. Perfect answer. Thank you, ma'am. Good, we got it. The local activity has substantial effect in interstate commerce. And that's enough for Congress to regulate it. Now, Taylor, let me ask you a question, please. This is perhaps not a pleasant question, but I'll ask it. Are people commerce? Are people moving on a highway commerce? We talk about lottery ticket, right? A lottery ticket moved from one state to another. That's a commercial article. Is a person an article a commercial article?
I think the person, no.
You seem a little uncomfortable, a little unsure.
Well, because I want to say that during slavery, the slave owners probably would say yes.
You anticipate my next question. Isn't it just a little bit strange, just a little bit, to say that a person is an article, a chattel, the same way a lottery ticket might be, or a piece of lumber, or a piece of steel? It's just a little bit strange. Yeah, Stephen?
Didn't we go for the Anti-Fugitive Slave Act case where they said yes, that they are?
Is that a precedent you think the Warren Court wanted to rely on?
Yes.
Do you think they would want to rely on the slavery case?
I thought you were trying to.
You said yes real quick.
I thought you were trying to you were on that, because the way you're asking the question, but yeah, no.
This is a court committed to civil rights. We all agree, Brown versus Board, right?
Yeah, you don't want to.
And the way they upheld this law, no, just hang tight. The way they upheld this law is by basically analogizing people to articles of chattel. I'll get to the Douglas opinion in maybe a few moments. Yeah, Chanel.
I think they didn't like that that's what they had to allow, but they did it to better the movement.
So the end is justified the means, right?
It did here.
The precedent got where they wanted to go, so that's good enough?
Yes. I think that's what they were doing.
All right. Everyone just sees sort of the dilemma, right? Everyone just understand that. It's sort of perverse in a very important legislation that attempted to eradicate segregation in these institutions. It wasn't successful in a way, but just attempted to eradicate segregation. They rely on authority from the Fugitive Slave Catching Statute to basically analogize people moving between states as articles of chattel. Justice Douglas, though. Justice Douglas was a Roosevelt appointee who who was, I'm not exaggerating, the most liberal member of the court. And you can see this in his opinion, he seems a little bit like uncomfortable with this. You can see this when he's writing. It's like, why are we treating people as commerce, as chattel? We didn't fight a civil war and pass the 14th Amendment to treat people as chattel. Like it's the opposite, right? It's that they're not commercial articles. Again, this is basically saying specifically African American people were chattel. This wasn't applying to white people. I mean, that wasn't what this law was for. Okay, so instead, Justice Douglas looks at the 14th Amendment. All right, I will give you a mini preview. We will come back to the 14th Amendment after spring break, and we will talk about this again. But just to make this very easy, Section 1 of the 14th Amendment says, no state shall deny to any person the equal protection of the laws. Brown had said only a couple years earlier that that means you can't discriminate on the basis of race. Okay? Okay, that sounds simple. Okay, Section 5 of the 14th Amendment gives Congress power. So remember I told you all of Congress's power is an article in Section 8? That's mostly true. There's some others. So Section 5 of the 14th Amendment, passed in 1868, gives Congress additional authorities. What kind of authorities? Congress has the power to enforce by appropriate legislation. Appropriate. Huh. That sounds like proper, doesn't it? Necessary and proper, maybe? Huh. So what's going on there? McClung. Congress shall have the power to enforce by appropriate legislation provisions of this article. What does that mean? Go back to Section 1. So in other words, Congress can pass laws to ensure that the equal protection of laws are provided. So what Justice Douglas says is, wait, why are we doing all this stuff with Commerce Clause? We fought a bloody civil war to pass the 14th Amendment, and the 14th Amendment says that what do you call it? That Congress passes laws. Why don't we uphold this under Section 5? How many votes did he get? Uno. Got one vote. So the justices, again, were more willing to actually use this broad reading of the Commerce Clause, going back to our chart back in Darby and Filburn, than they were of the Civil Rights Act of 1860, the 14th Amendment. We will explain more why later. But keep in mind, again, this is 1964. This is 20 years after the New Deal. The precedent became that we're not going to scrutinize Congress, so they didn't have to. They took the easy path of saying, okay, Wickard, Darby, all good, all kosher. Everyone with me? Okay. The court here also discusses the means and the ends. I want to just focus on this one in Heart of Atlanta Motel, because some of you asked me about this, right? Once you get to the 1960s, and this was Steve's question before, the tests become much tighter. They're using the language, I think, very precisely. So they'd say, how obstructions of commerce may be removed, what means are to be employed, is within the sound and exclusive discretion of the Congress. In other words, Congress can choose their means of how they accomplish goals. It's not for the court to say, oh, why did you do this? You could have done this differently, right? It's for Congress to decide. And then the court says, the means must be reasonably adapted to the ends. The means must be reasonably adapted to the ends. This is a reasonable person standard, right? If there's a reasonable relationship between what Congress is doing, what they're trying to do, that's good enough for us. We're not going to second guess it. We're not going to say, well, you pile too many inference. You know, if a person drives from this state to this state and they can't stop here, that might burden the commerce. That's good enough for us, right? We're not in the business of it. So if the local activity has substantial effect on interstate commerce and there's a reasonable relation to the means to the ends, good, you survive. The law is valid. That is Heart of Atlanta Motel. And that, in my view, or at least in Randy's view, did not go beyond Wickard. We think that's actually consistent with Wickard. It didn't push any further. The next case did, which we'll get to in a few moments. Okay. Questions on Heart of Atlanta Motel? Yes, Michael.
I thought it was, when I was reading it, there was more about just people moving generally would be commerce and not people who were like articles of commerce.
What does that mean, people moving?
You know, like, you know, because people move and then like that's kind of how commerce happens.
Ooh, but you shifted it. The people, what's the commerce? Is the people of the commerce, or things that people do is the commerce?
Things that people do.
Right, but the issue here is the movement itself was commercial activity. This law didn't regulate what people might do along the way. It's really regulate hotels that are stationary. In other words, it said the mere act that people are traveling from state A to state B, that itself is a commercial activity that can be aggregated to justify the law.
Yeah.
The stuff you're saying is the effect upon it. As in, when people have these burdens, it affects them. That they might be hungry, they have nowhere to sleep, you know, that they're not able to get services they need. That's the effect. But the actual activity is the people themselves moving. That makes sense?
Yeah. I mean, no.
I don't think you have to agree, but you understand the court's
Yeah, I
reasoning.
see what you're saying. Yeah.
Again, I think not every book includes Justice Douglas's concurrence, and we thought to include. I think it illustrates that even in the 60s, at the height of this era, people sort of saw a little bit differently. That's why we put the Douglas one. Yeah, Brian, go ahead, and then Taylor.
Did a substantial test, aggregation is part of it, so you look at aggregation to see if it's.
Yes, it's not just the Heart of Atlanta Motel. It's if every single hotel in the South had this policy, and you aggregate together their segregation policies, in the aggregate, that will substantially affect traveling. Because look, you could just say, okay, then just don't go to this hotel, go to another hotel. But if every hotel had this policy, or maybe at least many of them had this policy, you put that all together, you aggregate it, that creates a substantial effect. Good. This will be more evident in the next case, the Katzenbach case I want to get to. Taylor, was your hand up?
Yeah, you said the mere fact that people move from state A to state B is for on
Right. In other words, the interstate commerce is the people moving from A to B. The local activity is what the hotel policy is. So in other words, this is Alexander's point before. What's the local activity? Running a segregation hotel. What's the interstate commerce? People driving from north to south. Does the local activity as a hotel segregation policy in the aggregate have a substantial effect on people moving from A to B? Yes. That's why the law is valid. Alexander, does that make sense also? Yes, Sabina.
I just had a quick question. So regarding like part of the land, it's not like when we're looking at all these cases together, kind of going through like because with part of Atlanta does go through the different cases one by one, kind of justifying its position. I don't know, removing, you know, the direct test and then the substantial test, but when we're looking at cases or scenarios, we should look at how things kind of come together, like kind of like the evolution, because that's kind of what was a little bit confusing about the case for me.
About Heart of Atlanta?
Yeah, because of, you know, how to just bring, like, because they were pulling out so many of the different cases and justifying it with, you know, there's the direct test.
Correct.
You know, the federal and the state, you know, one of the things that kind of confused me is like with Hammer as well. You know, can the state handle it? How far do we, you know, broaden how we see, does it interfere or not? I don't know, it's like a lot of kind of process.
Well, let me put it this way. By the time you get to 1964 with Heart of Atlanta, you have this sort of the New Deal in your rearview mirror. And then all these precedents. I think what the courts are struggling with is how to reconcile a lot of different precedents. Is that maybe what you're asking?
Yeah.
And I think they're trying to clean things up. And what they're trying to say is, look, we're doing substantial effects tests, we're doing aggregation, and we're doing this kind of this reasonable relation between the means and the ends. This is all things we're doing. And the opinion's a little bit jumbled. I think that maybe with your frustration, am I getting that sense?
Yeah.
It's a bit of a confusing opinion. It throws a lot of stuff in there. It's not clean. What you'll find in this class is as you get to more recent opinions, the justices try to synthesize or make sense of a lot of earlier precedents, and they don't always fit together neatly. So, for example, the courts never actually overruled EC Knight. It's never happened. Hammer, yeah, was overruled in Darby, but EC Knight was never overruled. So, how do you sort of reconcile these precedents? It's a challenge. Can I do the last case? We're at 10 minutes left or 8 minutes left. All right, so the next case is about Ollie's Barbecue. All right. Who's next? Patiently waiting. Okay. Shrey, you want to give me the facts, please, on Ollie's Barbecue, a Katzenbach and McClung?
So, Ollie's Barbecue was a restaurant in Alabama. It was close to a state highway and a little bit further away from railroad and bus stations. And they had a rule that said, only white people could sit in and eat, and African Americans could get a takeout service.
Correct.
And the food that they bought, about 46% was from out of state.
Correct.
So, basically they said, since a substantial portion of the food served was from interstate commerce, that them not letting, them dine in would be violating the Civil Rights Act.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. Very good fact, Shrey. All right, so by the way, I have a lot of trinkets in my office. I actually have a matchbook I found from Ollie's Barbecue. And it's relevant for a reason. I promise this is actually a reason. I put a copy on the screen. This matchbook was actually made in Atlanta, Georgia. So I have proof that they have goods from another state. I found this on eBay. I was so excited. You have no idea. All right. Proof. Constitutional proof. All right. You can look at it later after class. You don't have eBay alerts for Supreme Court cases? I have a lot of them. I have so many. I have a spike from the Erie Railroad.
Really? Is it in your office?
It is. I got a lot of good stuff. I got good stuff.
You have the barbecue sauce.
I have Ollie's barbecue sauce. I bought a case of the barbecue sauce from Ollie's. I've never actually tried it. Now it's almost 20 years old. I'm not going to try it, but I have a case of this barbecue sauce. Anyway, what is the local activity here? The local activity here is having a segregationist restaurant, not seating black customers. What is the effect in interstate commerce? Well, it's true this was near a highway, but there really wasn't any evidence that people were coming here from out of state. Right? This was not like a hotel near the interstate highway. This was a small barbecue joint in Birmingham. I doubt it attracted anyone from out of Alabama. The court could have said, well, in the aggregate, if all the local, barbecue joints in Alabama did this, then you can get to, affect interstate commerce in the Wickard. They didn't do that, though. They introduced a new test or a new approach called the jurisdictional hook. Juliana, what is the jurisdictional hook? It's such a weird phrase, but that's what people call it.
It allowed Congress to regulate local activities that had to do with stuff being bought in interstate commerce.
Correct. So any business that uses goods that travel in interstate commerce is now subject to federal oversight. So if you're a restaurant and you import let's say some ribs or some pork from another state, you now have a hook. In other words, Congress has jurisdiction. They have a hook to get you. If you buy your matchbook from Atlanta and you give this out in your restaurant, hello, that's proof you got it from out of state, and Congress can regulate you. So in many regards, Katzenbach went further than Heart of Atlanta. Why? Because Katzenbach said, even if people aren't traveling from out of state, the things that you use, the pots, the pans, the pork, the beef, whatever it is, that itself is the basis for federal regulation. Wouldn't see that. This is called the jurisdictional hook, and there's another professor. Don't laugh. He calls it the herpes theory. Because once your business touches interstate commerce, you're stuck with it forever, right? You get rid of it. I swear it's awful, but you'll remember. You'll never forget. You said herpes Blackman, right? What's that? Never mind. I don't know. It's really better if I don't know. Save us, Brian. The case is decided the same day. These are called companion cases. Where the court will often take one or more cases that decide similar issues and decide them at the same time. Well, again, if in fact you have a hotel that caters to out-of-state travelers, I think you go to the Heart of Atlanta. If you have a local business that uses stuff from out of state, you go to Katzenbach. But to be clear, the hotel gets stuff from out of state, right? Hotel, I'm sure, serves food and beverages from out of state. So once you get to Katzenbach, you see it goes even further than Wickard, in our view. that pushes the law even further, federal power. The herpes theory, Lord help us. It's there. You won't forget it. This actually arises a couple of years ago. These guys tried to make local guns. Basically, firearms made entirely from local supplies. They use like metal from the state and rocks from the state and wood from the state. And the federal government said, we can still regulate this because it affects interstate commerce. It doesn't even matter. It's a game. And this was actually, to Addie's point before, if the court just says, feds regulate whatever you want, I can live with that. That's a rule that makes sense. But when you have these tests that mean you're always going to lose, and then when you find something novel like a gun made in one, say, oh, we're going to ban that also, then what's the point of these tests? Just it's kind of like a game, right? You spend all the time litigating an issue you're going to lose on. Okay. Everyone get Heart of Atlanta and Katzenbach. So I'll take a step back and just sort of just go through this document one at a time. We got about 2 minutes left. We'll make it work. And we go from McClung, necessary means convenient, to Prigg, that Congress can execute all powers, not just those in Article 1, Section 8. DeWitt pushes it back, saying there's too remote a relation between the means and the ends. It's indirect. Hepburn says, never mind. I'm sorry. Knox says, never mind. We're in an emergency. It's a civil war. Congress needs these broad powers, and we're not going to scrutinize it. By the way, Knox is bigger, in our view, than Prigg and anything the New Deal court did. EC United said, no, we're going to enforce the direct effects test. That the mere fact that local wages may affect shipment of goods is not enough. It's too indirect of an effect. Champion v. Ames said, well, but morality, the state's complete morality. Hammer said, we will look at the real motivation, the real purpose. Is there a pretext involved? And Shekapaltry said, this law goes too far. It delegates power to the executive branch, and there's only indirect effect between the chickens you're picking and its effect on interstate commerce. The New Deal, moving quickly. Again, this starts teasing up the substantial effects test that local conditions local union conditions might affect interstate commerce. And Darby said, even local wages affect interstate commerce. Overruling Hammer and Wickard combines aggregation with substantial effects. Heart of Atlanta, again, treats certain people as commercial articles. And Katzenbach is a herpes case, which says anything that touches interstate commerce is forever tainted if that's going to regulate it. Done. If you can do that, you'll get an A exam. You just what? Taylor. Yeah.
You called 1937 a sort of revolution.
I did, yeah.
What was that?
It was Revolution of 37. It was after the 36th presidential election. Roosevelt won his second term, and the Supreme Court, for one reason or another, said, okay, we're going to now start upholding your policies. It was a serious change in the way the court approached the Constitution. And the substantial effects was at the core of that change. Good question. 37 is a big year. We'll come back to 37 later this semester. Anything else? Yes, Sheldon.
In Katzenbach, it seems like one of the arguments that the court made is that the movement of Negroes is commerce.
That's what exactly
So now people are commerce.
That's what Justice Douglas seems to be said about, I think.
So we can make an argument, I assume, on a test that people are commerce.
Well, under the court's precedents, that's what they seem to be saying. It's not a pleasant argument, but that's what they're saying. Okay. Anyone else? Thank you all. I'll see you all if you want to come talk. Otherwise, I'll see you all on Monday. Thank you so much. Yeah. Yeah, no, I know. Yeah, 1 second. Just